My husband said I was too old and fat after 40 years, so I lost weight and made him lose his money. If you're watching this, drop a comment letting me know where you're tuning in from. And if my story speaks to you, hit that subscribe button. Because trust me, you're gonna want to see what happens next. I spent hours preparing the anniversary dinner. 37 years with Richard Johnson. 37 years of standing behind him, raising our children, teaching other people's children, and keeping our home running like clockwork. The table gleamed with our best china. I'd worn my navy blue dress with silver trim that Richard had barely noticed when I bought it last year. I'd even gone to the salon, trying to cover the gray in my coils. 2 hours after he was supposed to be home, I heard his key in the lock. "You're still up?" He didn't look at me as he dropped his briefcase by the door. "It's our anniversary." My voice sounded smaller than I intended. "I made your favorite." Richard sighed, checking his watch. "I already ate with the team." I swallowed hard. "I thought we could talk about that second honeymoon to the Caribbean, now that Jaden's finished college." "Jesus, Eleanor." He finally looked at me, really looked, and what I saw in his eyes made something inside me shrivel. "Who would want to go on a vacation with you? I barely want to come home most days." "What's that supposed to mean?" "Look at yourself." His gesture encompassed all of me. "You've let yourself go. Christ, you're just old and fat now." I stood there, champagne glass halfway to my lips, as 37 years of subtle criticism crystallized into this moment of naked contempt. "I've been a good husband," he continued, loosening his tie, "provided everything, put up with this." He gestured at me again. My hand trembled. "This? This is the woman who raised your children, who supported your career, and you think that entitles you to what? Admiration? Desire?" He laughed, a short, ugly sound. "I could have any woman I want, Eleanor. Remember that." In that moment, something shifted inside me. Not heartbreak, though that was there too, but something harder, something like clarity. "I think I've always known," I said quietly. "Known what?" Richard was already walking away. "That you stopped seeing me years ago. But now I'm wondering if you ever really saw me at all." Later, after Richard had fallen asleep, I stood in our bathroom staring at my reflection. The woman looking back had lines around her eyes and silver threading through her dark hair. Her body showed the evidence of bearing 3 children and decades of cooking meals that often went unappreciated. But beneath the exhaustion in her eyes, I saw something else, something that had been sleeping for a very long time. And as I turned away from the mirror, I made her a promise. "I'm going to wake you up." I met Richard Johnson at 22. Fresh out of Howard with dreams bigger than my bank account. He found me in the university library where I was researching graduate programs. "You're in my seat," he'd said, but with a smile that turned the words from accusation to introduction. He was 25, finishing his MBA, with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where he was going. His ambition seemed like security. His certainty felt like strength. 6 months later, when he proposed, my mother pulled me aside at our engagement dinner. "Marriage is a partnership," she'd said, her hands, strong from decades of domestic work in white women's homes, gripping mine. "Don't lose yourself in his shadow, baby." I'd laughed it off. What did Mama know about modern relationships? Richard supported my career plans. We were equals, but life shifts so gradually you don't notice until the ground beneath your feet is unrecognizable. First, it was the joint bank account. "It's easier if I handle the finances," Richard said. "You've never been good with numbers." Then, after Marcus was born, my plans for graduate school faded into the background. "We don't need the extra income," Richard insisted. "Focus on our son." By the time Danielle arrived 3 years later, I'd settled into a routine, teaching during the day, mothering in the evenings, fitting myself into the spaces Richard left open. When Jaden completed our family 5 years after that, the pattern was set in stone. The comments about my body started after Jaden. Small at first, "Maybe go easy on the carbs tonight, honey," evolving over the years into pointed remarks about letting myself go. I'd watch Richard at family gatherings, commanding attention, relegating me to photographer or server. "Eleanor's too emotional to understand business," he'd say when I offered an opinion. Our children grew up seeing their father shine while their mother stood in the background, nodding and smiling. After one particularly humiliating dinner where Richard corrected my story about our honeymoon, "That's not how it happened at all. Eleanor's memory is terrible." My friend Vivian cornered me in the kitchen. Girl, do you hear yourself? Her eyes were fierce with concern. You start every sentence with Richard thinks or Richard says. Where are you in your own life? He's just strong-willed, I defended weakly. That's not strength, Eleanor. That's control, and what he's doing has a name. I'd pulled away, uncomfortable with the implication. It's not abuse, Viv. He's never laid a hand on me. Some bruises don't show on the skin, she'd replied. I didn't want to hear it then. But now, staring at the receipts for dinners I never attended, hotel rooms I never visited, and the photo of Richard with his arm around a woman who was definitely not his wife, Vivian's words echoed in my mind. The school auditorium buzzed with chatter as I clutched my acceptance speech. After 23 years teaching history at Southside High, they were giving me the Educator Excellence Award. 23 years of showing up every day, making sure brown and black children saw themselves in the history I taught. And the recipient of this year's award is Eleanor Johnson. Applause filled the room as I walked to the podium, scanning the crowd for familiar faces. I'd left 3 messages for Richard, reminded Marcus and Danielle last Sunday, even texted Jaden, though he was away at grad school. The empty seats in the front row answered my unspoken question. I gave my speech anyway, thanking colleagues and mentioning students who'd touched my life. But when I walked into our house that evening, trophy in hand, Richard and Jaden, home for spring break, were sprawled on the couch watching basketball, beer bottles on the coffee table. I won. I held up the trophy, voice steady, despite the hollowness spreading through my chest. Educator of the Year. That's nice, Mom. Jaden's eyes never left the screen. Richard glanced up briefly. We're out of beer. Can you grab some from the fridge? I stood there, award in hand, invisible in my own home. Something inside me, something that had been bending for years, finally snapped. Without a word, I walked upstairs to our bathroom and locked the door. My hands shook as I opened Richard's medicine cabinet, fingers wrapping around his blood pressure pills. How many would it take? To disappear completely instead of this halfway vanishing act I'd been performing for years? The phone's shrill ring cut through my thoughts. I answered automatically, vision blurred by tears. Eleanor? You all right? Vivian's voice carried the warmth I desperately needed. No, I whispered. The first honest answer I'd given in years. I'm not. I had a feeling. What happened? The story poured out of me. The award, the empty seats, coming home to requests for beer instead of congratulations. Through it all, Vivian listened, her occasional the lifeline I clung to. You need to talk to someone professional, Elle. This ain't right. Richard would never agree to, not him. You, just you. How would I even... My voice trailed off as I caught my reflection in the mirror, a woman I barely recognized anymore. I know someone. Black woman therapist. She'll work with your insurance. Keep it confidential. Richard handles all the insurance papers. Then pay cash. Use that emergency money your mama left you. The money you never told Richard about. I touched the cold porcelain of the sink. How did you know about that? Because your mama told me to make sure you kept it separate. Said every woman needs something that's just hers. Her voice softened. It's time, Eleanor. Time to figure out who you are when you're not being Richard's wife. After we hung up, I flushed the pills and reached behind the stack of towels to the loose tile where I'd hidden my mother's legacy. The envelope was thin, but it contained enough for a fresh start. Not an ending, I decided, but maybe finally a beginning. What would you say is your biggest fear right now, Eleanor? Dr. Maya Wilson's office felt like a cocoon. Warm lighting, plants thriving in corners, artwork by Black women artists on the walls. After 3 sessions, I was still getting used to a space where my words weren't interrupted, dismissed, or corrected. That I've wasted my life, I admitted, the truth stinging my throat. That I've been a fool for 37 years. She nodded. Many women in your situation fear exactly that. But I want to challenge something. You haven't wasted your life. You've raised 3 children, educated countless students, maintained friendships. The question isn't whether your life had value. It's whether you've been allowed to recognize that value. Something about her framing shifted the ground beneath me. I need you to do something this week, Dr. Wilson said. Open a separate bank account, just yours. Richard handles all our... This isn't about Richard. This is about you having options. That afternoon, I walked into South Shore Community Bank and opened an account with my mother's money. The teller didn't question why a woman my age might need her own account. She'd probably seen it before. At home, I was putting away groceries when Richard stormed in, face flushed. "Where were you? I called the store looking for you an hour ago." I froze, milk carton halfway to the refrigerator. "I had some other errands." "What errands? Who were you with?" "No one. Don't lie to me." His fist came down on the counter, making me jump. In that moment, I saw us as if from above. A man towering over a woman shrinking against kitchen cabinets. A scene from a movie I'd watched 1,000 times without recognizing the plot. "My phone was on silent," I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. "And I don't appreciate being interrogated in my own home." Richard's eyes widened. This wasn't the script we'd been following for decades. Before he could respond, his phone chimed. He grabbed it, scowling, then suddenly paled. "I have to go out." "Now? It's almost dinner." "Emergency at work." He was already heading for the door, phone clutched tight. But in his haste, something unprecedented happened. Richard left his phone on the counter when he went to grab his jacket. When it chimed again, I saw the notification preview. "Monique, can't wait to see you tonight. Miss your hands on me." The message cut off there, but it was enough. The ground shifted again, pieces falling into place, late nights, weekend conferences, the growing emotional and physical distance. Alone in the kitchen, knife suspended above the cutting board, I made a decision. No tears. Not yet. First, I needed answers. And for the first time in decades, I was going to find them myself. The irony wasn't lost on me. After decades of being the dutiful wife, I was now following my husband through downtown Chicago like a character in some spy movie. Richard's business dinner was at Martini Park, an upscale lounge where he'd taken me exactly once, years ago, complaining afterward about the prices. Today, he held the door for a woman in a fitted red dress, his hand lingering at the small of her back, in a gesture of intimacy that used to be mine. I didn't need to see more. The expensive restaurant receipts I'd found hidden in his office, the mystery transfers from our joint account, the hotel charges in neighborhoods where Richard had no business meetings, they told the rest of the story. What surprised me was my reaction. Not heartbreak, but cold, clarifying anger. Not just at Richard, but at myself. How had I become this woman, erased so completely that my husband could build a parallel life without fear of discovery? The next day, I invited Danielle to lunch at her favorite Thai place. "Thanks for making time for your old mom," I said as we settled into our booth. I nodded, taking a careful sip of water. "I saw your father last night, at Martini Park." Her fork paused halfway to her mouth, then continued as if nothing had happened. "Oh?" "He was with a woman, attractive, younger, looked very familiar with him." Danielle set down her fork. "Mom, how long have you known Danny?" The question hung between us like smoke. When she finally met my eyes, I saw shame there, but also relief. 5 years, she whispered. He said you had an arrangement, that you knew but didn't want to discuss it." I absorbed this information like a physical blow. 5 years, around the time my mother had been dying of cancer. "And you believed him." It wasn't a question, but Danielle answered anyway. "He's very convincing, Mom. And you never said anything, so you assumed I was complicit in my own humiliation." My voice remained steady, though my hands gripped my napkin beneath the table. "Did Marcus know too?" Her silence was answer enough. "And Jaden?" "We agreed not to tell him. He was away at college, and he's always been more—" She trailed off. "More what? More likely to tell me the truth." Danielle flinched. "More sensitive. Like you." Those 3 words, "like you," revealed so much about how my daughter saw me, how Richard had taught her to see me. Sensitive, emotional, weak. "I'm sorry, Mom." Tears welled in Danielle's eyes. "I'm not asking for apologies. I'm giving you information. Things are going to change, Danielle. I'm going to change them. I'm giving myself 18 months. Walking to my car, I felt lighter than I had in years. The anger was still there, but now it had purpose, direction. Richard had been building his secret life for years. Now it was my turn. "We're going to start by building your strength back," Dr. Wilson said during our 6th session. "Not just emotionally, but in every area Richard has controlled." For months, I'd been following her guidance. The separate bank account now held a portion of each paycheck. I'd begun walking before dawn, reacquainting myself with a body I'd been taught to despise. "I want to go back to school," I blurted out. "For my master's. I never finished it." Dr. Wilson's smile was like sunrise. "Tell me more." That evening, I sat at our dining room table with university brochures spread before me. When Richard came home, he barely glanced at them. "What's all this?" "I'm applying to graduate programs in African American history. University of Chicago has an evening program designed for working professionals." He laughed, the dismissive sound I'd grown accustomed to. "At your age? What's the point?" Instead of shrinking, I met his gaze. "The point is that I want to. The point is that I've put it off for 30 years. And who's going to pay for this midlife crisis?" He loosened his tie, confident in his control of our finances. "I've applied for scholarships, and I have my own money." That caught his attention. "What do you mean, your own money?" "My salary, Richard. I've been teaching for 23 years. Your salary goes into our joint account." "A portion does," I corrected. "The rest is mine." His face darkened. "Since when?" "Since I decided it should be." I gathered the brochures calmly. "Dinner's in the oven. I'm going to be late for my information session." What Richard didn't know was that during our marriage, I'd taken continuing education courses in personal finance, initially to be a better economics teacher for my students, but increasingly to understand the systems Richard used to control our family. 3 months into my program, the physical changes became impossible to ignore. The morning walks had evolved into jogs, then a membership at a small gym owned by a former student. The woman who now looked back at me from the mirror stood straighter. Her clothes, new ones I'd bought without seeking approval, fit a body that was stronger. Around the same time, my history of the Great Migration Project began attracting attention. What had started as oral histories collected from my elderly neighbors evolved into a structured archive that caught the eye of the State Historical Society. "We'd like to feature your work in our quarterly journal," the editor told me, "and there's potential for a small grant if you're interested in expanding the project." Richard's reaction to this news was predictable. Dismissive, then controlling when he realized there was money involved. "You should have consulted me before committing to anything," he said over dinner. "Actually, I'm managing quite well. My project advisor thinks I could complete my thesis ahead of schedule." "Project advisor?" His eyebrows rose. "You never mentioned any advisor." "His name is Dr. Thomas. He's the department chair." Richard's jaw tightened. "He?" I almost laughed at the irony. Richard, who had been sleeping with another woman for years, was jealous of my academic advisor. "Yes, Richard. He's 67, happily married to his husband of 40 years, and one of the most respected scholars in his field." I set down my fork. "And even if he wasn't any of those things, your concern would still be misplaced." "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I'm not the one you should be worried about. I'm not the one with secrets." The color drained from his face. For a moment, I thought he might confess. Instead, he pushed back from the table. "I don't have time for your dramatic accusations." As he retreated to his home office, I remained at the table, finishing my meal in solitude. But it wasn't the lonely silence of previous years. This silence had purpose. This silence was mine. Everyone, please welcome Eleanor Johnson, whose Voices of the Great Migration Project is changing how we understand Chicago's South Side history. The applause as I approached the podium at the University of Chicago's Humanities Conference was modest. This was an academic gathering, not a rock concert, but it was real. These people had read my work, valued my research, saw me as a scholar rather than just someone's wife or mother. 6 rows back, Jaden smiled proudly. He'd flown in from California specifically for this presentation. Beside him sat Vivian, who'd been my rock through the 15 months of quiet transformation since I'd discovered Richard's affair. Richard's seat was empty, though he'd promised to come. No surprise there. I delivered my presentation without notes, speaking from the heart about the elderly South Side residents whose stories formed the backbone of my research. When I finished, the questions were thoughtful, engaged. Before I could answer one question, the door at the back of the lecture hall opened. Richard slipped in, taking the reserved seat next to Jaden. My son's face registered surprise, then guarded pleasure. After the presentation, as attendees mingled over coffee, Richard approached with an unfamiliar expression, something between confusion and reluctant admiration. "That was impressive," he said, as if the word cost him something. "I had no idea your project had gotten this much attention." "There's a lot you don't know about my work, Richard." I accepted a glass of wine from a passing server, though I've mentioned it at dinner several times. His jaw tightened at the gentle rebuke. "Jaden says you're being considered for some kind of fellowship? And a book deal? The fellowship is still a long shot. The book is more certain. I took a sip of wine, watching his face. The advance isn't huge, but it's a start. An advance? You're getting paid for this. His tone shifted from impressed to calculating so quickly it was almost comical. We should talk about how that fits into our financial planning. My advance, my planning. I kept my voice low but firm, just like your bonus from last quarter was yours. That's different. My income has always been our primary support. Yes, I know the script, Richard. I smiled to soften the words. But I'm writing a new one now. His eyes narrowed. What's gotten into you lately? This attitude, the secretive bank account, the weight loss, self-respect, I interrupted. That's what's gotten into me. A colleague approached then, saving me from Richard's response. As I introduced them, I watched my husband slip into his public persona. Charming, supportive, proud of his accomplished wife. It was a mask he wore well, one that had fooled me for years, but I wasn't fooled anymore. Later that night, my phone vibrated with a text from Jaden. So proud of you today, Mom. Dad was impressed too, even if he wouldn't admit it. Love you. I smiled in the darkness. My youngest had always seen me most clearly, and now, finally, I was seeing myself with that same clarity. Is this seat taken? I looked up from my coffee to find Richard's mistress standing beside my table, Monique Peterson. I'd learned her full name months ago when I started compiling evidence of their affair. Please, I gestured to the empty chair, keeping my face neutral. I've been expecting you. Surprise flickered across her features. You have? Richard's been increasingly erratic lately. I figured he'd said something to you about me. About the changes. Monique studied me carefully before sitting down. He said you're having some kind of breakdown, going back to school, losing weight, making accusations. I couldn't help but laugh. Of course he did. And you believed him enough to track me down, but not enough to stay away. She had the grace to look uncomfortable. I wanted to see for myself. And what do you see? Monique? She blinked at the sound of her name. You know who I am. I've known for almost 2 years. I took a sip of my coffee. About a month after Richard told me I was too old and fat for him to desire anymore. Quite the timing, wouldn't you say? He said you had an arrangement, that you didn't care as long as he was discreet. Her voice held a note of defensiveness. Yes, he told our children the same lie. I leaned forward slightly. Tell me, when he comes home from business trips, does he critique your cooking? Comment on your weight? Check your phone when you're in the shower? Monique's expression flickered, then hardened. That's not the same? You're right. You can leave whenever you want. I built a life with him. I pulled out a folder I'd prepared for this meeting. But that's not why I wanted to talk to you. You wanted this meeting? Confusion spread across her face. I left my regular coffee shop location on my shared calendar. I knew Richard would mention it to you eventually, especially since he's been getting worried about what I might know. I slid the folder across the table. This is for you. She opened it cautiously, then frowned at the contents. Bank statements? Tax returns? What is this? Evidence that Richard has been embezzling from the church where he serves as treasurer. Evidence that he's been moving money between accounts to hide his lifestyle from me and his spending on you from his partners at the firm. I kept my voice matter of fact. He's not just a cheater, Monique. He's a thief. Why should I believe you? This could all be fabricated. Check the account numbers against the gifts he's given you. The hotel receipts against your trips together. I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm asking you to verify it yourself. After she left, clutching the folder like it might bite her, I remained at the table. For 15 years, Monique had been the shadow woman in my marriage. Meeting her in person had been surprisingly anticlimactic. My phone buzzed with a text from Jaden. Can we talk tonight? Something happened with Dad. So it begins, I thought, gathering my things. Phase 1 complete. When I got home, Richard was waiting, face flushed with anger. You met with Monique? What the hell were you thinking? I set down my bag calmly. I was thinking it was time we all stopped pretending. You had no right. I had every right. My voice remained steady, while his escalated. You've been sleeping with her for 15 years, Richard. You involved our children in your deception. You stole from our church to fund your double life. And you had the audacity to make me feel worthless while you did it. He paled at the mention of the church funds. You don't know what you're talking about. I have copies of everything, Richard. Everything. And unlike you, I'm not bluffing. For the first time in our marriage, I saw something new in his eyes when he looked at me. Fear. The law office of Patricia Henderson was in a renovated brownstone in Hyde Park. The waiting room featured artwork by Black women artists and had none of the intimidating coldness I'd expected from a high-powered divorce attorney. "Mrs. Johnson," Patricia greeted me, "I've reviewed the documents you sent over. Please, come in." In her office, Patricia, 50-ish, with a crown of silver locks, fixed me with a direct gaze. "Before we begin, I want to be clear. My goal isn't to destroy your husband financially or emotionally. My goal is to ensure you receive what you're legally and morally entitled to after a nearly 40-year marriage." I nodded. "That's what I want too. Justice, not vengeance." "Good." She opened a folder containing the evidence I'd compiled. "Because based on what you've provided, we could pursue a much more aggressive strategy if you wanted to." Over the next hour, we discussed options. Patricia was frank about the complexity of the case. Divorces like yours, long-term marriages with significant assets and allegations of financial impropriety typically take 18 to 24 months to resolve, especially if contested, she explained. "Are you prepared for that?" "I've been preparing for 2 years," I replied. "I can handle it." Patricia nodded approvingly. The evidence of his embezzlement from the church would be devastating if made public. "I don't want to expose that unless absolutely necessary," I said firmly. "There are innocent people who would be hurt. That's wise. We'll use it as leverage, not as a first strike." That evening, I called a family meeting. To my surprise, all 3 of my children agreed to come. Even Marcus, who had been the most resistant to acknowledging the changes in me, though his eyes had been watching me with growing curiosity lately. "I've filed for divorce," I announced without preamble. "I wanted you to hear it from me first." Silence fell, heavy and charged. Then Danielle spoke. "Because of the affair?" "The affair is part of it," I acknowledged. "But this is about much more than your father's infidelity. This is about me reclaiming my life after decades of emotional abuse and financial control." "Abuse?" Marcus scoffed, but there was less conviction in his voice than there would have been 6 months ago. "Dad never laid a hand on you." "Not all abuse leaves bruises, Marcus." I kept my voice gentle. "Your father systematically undermined my confidence, controlled our finances, and isolated me from support systems for most of our marriage." "That's not how I remember it," he insisted, but there was uncertainty in his eyes. "Of course it isn't. You saw what your father wanted you to see." I leaned forward. "But I'm not here to turn you against him. You love your father, and that's as it should be. I'm simply letting you know that I'm making a change that's long overdue." Jaden, quiet until now, asked, "Are you okay? Mom, do you need anything from us?" His concern nearly broke my carefully maintained composure. "I'm okay. Better than I've been in years, actually. But there is something you can do. Give me the space to become whoever I'm going to be next." After they left, I sat alone in the quietness of the house that had been both my prison and my sanctuary for decades. My phone rang. Dr. Wilson checking in. "How did it go?" "Just like we practiced," I told her. I said my piece without apologizing for it. "And how do you feel?" "Like I'm standing at the edge of something vast, terrifying, but also beautiful." "That's freedom, Eleanor," she said softly. "That's what it feels like when you first recognize it." All rise. Court is now in session. The Honorable Judge Kimberly Watkins presiding. I smoothed my skirt as I stood, feeling Patricia's reassuring presence beside me. Across the aisle, Richard and his attorney, a slick downtown type with an Italian suit and permanent smirk, rose as well. This hearing was supposed to be straightforward, establishing temporary financial arrangements while our divorce proceeded. Richard had other ideas. "Your Honor," his attorney began after preliminaries, "my client contests his wife's claim to temporary support. Mrs. Johnson has recently received a book advance and fellowship funding. She is fully capable of supporting herself." Patricia stepped forward. "Your Honor, Mrs. Johnson's recent academic achievements don't negate Mr. Johnson's obligation to provide support after a 37-year marriage where she subordinated her career to raise their children and support his." Judge Watkins, a no-nonsense black woman about my age, glanced between the attorneys. "Mr. Peterson, your client's financial disclosures seem incomplete. There are several accounts mentioned in Mrs. Johnson's filing that don't appear in your documentation." Richard shifted uncomfortably in his seat as his attorney fumbled through papers. "Your Honor, my client maintains those are separate property, established before the marriage." "With respect, Your Honor," Patricia interjected, "we have documentation proving these accounts were opened 15 years ago, well into the marriage, and have been funded with marital assets. The judge's expression darkened. Mr. Peterson, does your client understand that incomplete financial disclosure is taken very seriously in my courtroom? What followed was exactly what Patricia had predicted. Faced with evidence of his financial deceptions, Richard quickly agreed to temporary support terms more favorable than we'd initially requested. Outside the courthouse, Vivian waited with a thermos of coffee and fierce pride in her eyes. How'd it go? Just as Patricia said it would. Richard caved as soon as the judge started asking questions about his hidden accounts. As we turned onto my street, I noticed a familiar car parked in front of the house. That's Marcus's BMW. Indeed, Marcus was sitting on the porch steps, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. He stood as I approached. Hey, Mom. This is a surprise. I unlocked the door, gesturing for him to follow me inside. In the kitchen, I poured us both iced tea, waiting for him to speak. Finally, he set down his glass with a decisive thud. Dad asked me to come talk to you, to convince you to drop the divorce. He stared at the condensation forming on his glass. He says you're being irrational, that you've been influenced by feminist friends and therapists who hate men. I nodded, unsurprised. And what do you think? Marcus looked up, meeting my eyes directly. I think I've been blind. 3 days ago, I overheard Dad on the phone with his financial advisor. He was trying to move money around, hide assets from the divorce settlement. A flicker of surprise must have shown on my face because Marcus gave a humorless laugh. Yeah, I know. I shouldn't be shocked, right? But hearing him talk about you like you were some enemy to be defeated, not his wife of 37 years, he shook his head. It made me think about all the times he talked about you that way in front of us, how we just accepted it. We don't need to rehash the past. Marcus, don't we though? His voice cracked slightly. I've been so loyal to him, so sure he was right about everything. About you. He's still your father, I said gently, and he loves you in his way. His way. Marcus repeated the words with new understanding. His way is pretty messed up, isn't it? I'm sorry, Mom. He reached across the table, taking my hand. I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. Later that evening, I received a text from Monique. You were right about the financial records. I confronted Richard. It didn't go well. Can we talk? Another piece falling into place. New Orleans embraced me like an old friend I'd never met before. The humid air, the music drifting from doorways, the way strangers called me baby with genuine warmth, all of it filled spaces inside me that had been empty for too long. My fellowship at Dillard University connected me with community elders whose stories paralleled those I'd collected in Chicago. My small rented apartment, modest but comfortable on my temporary teaching stipend, became a hub for impromptu research discussions. The divorce was progressing slowly, as Patricia had warned. Richard fought every disclosure, contested every valuation, delayed every hearing he could. But Patricia was patient and methodical, building our case with the precision of an architect. During one of my trips back to Chicago, I received an unexpected call from Pastor Green, the head minister at our church. Eleanor, I need to speak with you about a sensitive matter, he said, his voice grave. It's about the church finances. We met in his office, where he explained that the church's financial committee had discovered irregularities in the accounts Richard managed. We haven't confronted Richard yet, Pastor Green said, but given your situation, I thought you might have insights. I took a deep breath. I do have information, Pastor, and I'd like to propose a solution that protects the church while allowing this to be handled discreetly. By the time I left his office 2 hours later, we had a plan. Richard would be quietly removed from his position, with a story about health issues requiring him to step down. He would repay the missing funds, nearly $80,000 over the past decade, through a generous donation made in installments. The church would implement new financial oversight procedures without publicly acknowledging the breach of trust. It wasn't perfect justice, but it protected the institution that meant so much to our community. And it gave me powerful leverage in the divorce negotiations. When Pastor Green called Richard to his office the following day, I wasn't present. But Marcus was, having been recently appointed to the church's youth leadership committee, a position that conveniently placed him in the building during the meeting. Dad looked like he'd seen a ghost, Marcus reported afterward. When Pastor Green laid out the evidence and mentioned that you had helped develop the repayment plan, I thought he might collapse. Back in New Orleans the following week, I received a call from Patricia, Richard's attorney had requested a settlement conference. "He's ready to deal," she said, satisfaction evident in her voice. The church situation changed the equation. 3 days later, in a conference room overlooking Lake Michigan, Richard and I sat across from each other with our respective attorneys. Gone was the confident man who'd belittled me for decades. In his place sat someone diminished. The settlement we ultimately reached was fair. I would receive 40% of our assets, including a share of his pension and retirement accounts. The house would be sold, with proceeds divided equally. My attorney's fees would be covered. In exchange, I agreed to confidentiality regarding the church finances and certain aspects of our marriage. As we prepared to leave, Richard asked to speak with me alone. Our attorney stepped outside, reluctant but respectful of our request. "Why didn't you expose me?" he asked, genuine confusion in his voice. "You could have destroyed me, publicly humiliated me the way you humiliated me," I finished when he trailed off. He nodded, eyes downcast. "Because I'm not you, Richard." I gathered my purse, ready to end this chapter. And I never was. "Eleanor," he called as I reached for the door. "I'm sorry." The words hung in the air between us. Too little, too late, but perhaps the first honest thing he'd said to me in years. "I know," I replied, and I did. "Dr. Eleanor Johnson, congratulations on your master's degree completion and your appointment as project director for the Voices of Migration Archive." The dean's words were met with enthusiastic applause from the small gathering at Dillard University. After 18 months of intensive study, research, and writing, all while navigating a complex divorce, I had completed my master's degree. "Thank you all," I said, looking around at the colleagues, students, and friends who had gathered to celebrate. This project has been a journey of rediscovery, not just of these vital histories, but of my own voice. In the back of the room stood my 3 children. Marcus had driven Danielle and Jaden from the airport, surprising me with their presence. After the ceremony, we gathered at a restaurant in the French Quarter. "To Mom," Jaden raised his glass. "Who taught us it's never too late to rewrite your story?" "To Mom," echoed Danielle and Marcus, the latter with a sincerity that still felt new, but increasingly genuine. Later, as we walked along the Mississippi River, Danielle linked her arm through mine. "So what's next? Are you staying in New Orleans permanently?" "I'm not sure yet," I admitted. "The position here is wonderful, but I've also received an offer from Chicago State to develop a similar program. And there's your book coming out next year," Jaden added proudly. "The advance for that barely covers a year's rent," I laughed. "I'm not exactly becoming wealthy from academic publishing." "But you're doing what you love," Marcus observed. "That's worth something." "Everything," I corrected gently. "It's worth everything." The divorce had been finalized 2 months earlier, ending a process that had taken nearly 2 years from filing to completion. The settlement provided me with financial security, though not luxury. The house in Chicago had been sold, with my portion allowing me to make a modest down payment on a small condo near the university if I chose to return. For now, I was renting in New Orleans, living simply but comfortably on my project director's salary and teaching stipend. Contrary to Richard's dire predictions, I was managing my finances competently, even setting aside small amounts for retirement and travel. That evening, after my children returned to their hotel, I sat on the small balcony of my rented apartment, listening to a saxophone player on the corner. My phone buzzed with a text from Monique. "Saw the announcement about your project directorship. Congratulations. You were right about so many things." Over the past year, Monique and I had developed an unlikely friendship. After leaving Richard, she had done some serious reflection on her own patterns and choices. She'd returned to school herself, pursuing a degree in social work. I reflected on how differently things had turned out than I'd initially planned. When I'd first discovered Richard's betrayal, I'd been consumed with thoughts of revenge. But somewhere along the way, the goal had shifted from hurting him to healing myself. Richard had indeed lost money in our divorce, yes, but what he'd really lost was the control he'd maintained through manipulation and diminishment. What I'd gained wasn't just financial independence, but the profound understanding of my own worth. My journey wasn't over. At 61, I was still deciding what the next chapter would look like. Would I return to Chicago, where my children and lifelong friends lived? Or stay in New Orleans, where I'd discovered new parts of myself? For the first time in decades, these decisions were mine alone. not calculated to accommodate Richard's career or preferences, not limited by his assessment of my capabilities, not defined by my role as wife or mother, but by my own desires and ambitions. On my small desk inside lay the contract for my first book, based on the oral histories I'd collected. Voices Rising, Black Chicago's Great Migration Stories, would be published next spring. As I drifted towards sleep that night, I remembered something my mother used to say, "Baby, sometimes you have to lose everything to find out what you're really made of." She was right, as mothers so often are. In losing the identity I'd built around being Richard's wife, I'd discovered who Eleanor Johnson really was. Not a supporting character in someone else's story, but the protagonist of my own. And my story, I'd come to realize, was just beginning. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and share your story in the comments. Your journey might inspire another queen.